When I first found TCS, I read the list for like a month, and then I started posting frequently. And I find most people they never post much, or they post right away. But I don't see very many people who like wait 1 month and then post a lot to like learn what it's like, and then they start doing a lot, you know? That seems kind of bad. Like it seems like maybe the majority of people should do that. It seems good in general to get a feel for the group and then participate a bunch rather than as only like immediate or nothing ever. There, it reminds me of people should be able to reply to stuff like a week later. Most people, it's like they reply immediately or like very soon, or they reply never. So there isn't like a medium where they reply after a week or two. Usually with people, if they're not posting a bunch right away, then they never post much. And if they're not replying to a post within like 24 hours, then they're unlikely to ever reply. And that's one of the things they want privacy about, is like what they're doing. Like, are they going to reply later? They don't tell you. They don't say, "Oh, I'm done with this thread. I'm not going to reply more." They leave it ambiguous. They don't. Often, it's not actually a privacy issue. It's that they don't figure out in their own mind whether or not they're going to reply later. They don't. They don't plan, or if they do plan, it's often unrealistic, and they just don't know much about themselves. They're not good at introspection. You see people who say, "I'm going to reply later," and then they don't. They don't really take responsibility for following through on their word, and they they didn't take steps to ensure they would reply later, like putting automated notifications on their calendar. And they also didn't seriously, it's not a good prediction. Like, they're not like, have I said I will reply later and then replied later, like over 90% of the time, and I've done that a bunch of times and I have a track record, you know? Like, I can say I'll reply later in a week. And I actually do. I have a track record of that. It's worked many, many times. But most people's track record is that it usually doesn't work. And then they keep saying they'll do it with new things, and it keeps not working. And then they keep saying it, which is not honest. If it hasn't worked like most of the time, if your success rate is under half, you shouldn't keep making promises to people. Or if not promises, like saying you'll do things, like your word. It's not quite a promise, but it's something. Anyway, yeah, this shit's important. Okay, so people are confused about like what is personal or private, or if not confused, like disagree with FI about it. And they don't understand that things like what is private are disagreements, or what should be private, are disagreements that can be discussed rationally and critically in truth seeking ways. And that they can be curious. Someone thinks I should share this info, I don't want to share it. Why do they think I should share it? Why do they think that's a good idea? Do they know something I don't know? You can ask, you can be curious, instead of just assuming that they're wrong and stupid, and the problem is they have incomplete information. When you think the problem is someone has incomplete information, you're thinking they're wrong. You're thinking they have bad judgment. There is a disagreement there. Because they thought they had enough information to say whatever they said. So if they're wrong, they made a mistake. And you shouldn't just assume they're mistaken, because maybe you're mistaken. Maybe they know what they're talking about in some way that you didn't expect. Maybe they have information you didn't realize they have, or maybe they have methods of analysis that use less information than you would need. Like maybe they can analyze in a more information efficient way than you. They might know some way to do that. Especially if you're not like an expert analyst. Because like if you're one of the best, you can be like, well, I know all the tricks. It'd be like really fucking amazing if someone actually could analyze with way less information than I would need when I'm like, if you can outcompete 90% of people easily, and you're like way better than them and use way less information than them. So you get that kind of complaint that you're using too little information. People assume you couldn't do it, and you can. If you're that kind of person, and then someone has way less info than you would need, so it's like you need 10% of of the normal amount of info, but then this person is making conclusions with 10% of the info you have. So it's like 1% of the normal info. Then you could be pretty skeptical, but you could still ask. But the people who make this kind of complaint, usually their level of analysis is just at the normal level. Like they don't have any special skill at it. So why would they think they're never going to run into someone who's better at it than them when they're not especially great at it? I think a lot of people, it just doesn't even occur to them that there might be ways of analyzing something with less information. That you can piece things together with fewer clues. Like if you put it that way, that sounds obvious and they'd probably realize it, but like I don't think people necessarily realize that applies to analyzing information from emails. Oh yeah, so this is important too. Because people frequently, they don't want to talk about their goals. They don't want to talk about like the planning phase where they decide what projects to take on and why those over other ones. But then they want help with those projects. They're leaving you out of phase one of the project, where they choose that project and they plan how they're going to approach it and stuff, but then they want you to help with the project. But if they're not going to let you participate in phase one of the project, it's kind of unreasonable to expect you to help with phase two when it looks to you like phase one may have been done incorrectly and may not be something you agree with. But they do that all the time. Right, so a lot of people, they don't want to discuss the planning phase because none of their discussions reach conclusions. So if they discuss the planning phase, they'll just only discuss the planning phase. They'll never move on to part two. But yeah, this comment was particularly stupid. He like didn't read what was written to him, which he also did not quote. Because it specifically said, God, I'm gonna find it. I want to show this because it's ridiculous. He doesn't pay any attention. Let me switch clients. We're doing a search. This doesn't have anything private in it, so I can search here. Okay, Protagoras. Did I spell that right? See this. It says we have quotations of him and of his ipsissima verba, meaning actual words as opposed to paraphrases. The most famous is the homo mensura, man measure statement. So we have the actual quote. It says right here, like I was correcting him, I said he misquoted and I gave sources and details. And they clearly state that we have an actual quote. And the response is, I doubt we have an actual quote. As far as I know, we don't have one. It's like, I just fucking quoted that we do have the exact quote, and what you posted is not an accurate translation. It's not the right quote. Because he posted, man is the measure of all things, which is just not what it was. The quote is something like, of all things the measure is man, of the things that are, that they are, and of the things that are not, that they are not. Anyways, their translations differ, but all the translations are something like this, because this is the actual quote. This is like a major change, you know, this is not just a minor translation difference. Like this translation has a dash and a semicolon in it, that's like a minor, it's a punctuation change, but the wording looks the same. But then this translation, they say that the that could be how, so you could translate it either way. They're saying there's an option, and then they do that again. So there's like a a potential translation difference there, where you could say how they are instead of that they are, and you could say how they are not instead of that they are not. So there's like minor translation differences, but this is like a major difference. He's just changing the sentence and like leaving half of it out. Oh, this one doesn't have a sentence translation in it, but it was relevant to the discussion. Anyways, so right, he posted this misquote, and we have ipsissima verba. Yeah, verba. We have actual words, quotes, not paraphrases. And he just says, I don't think we have an exact quote. Yes, we do. And I just told you that. And his response was to delete everything I said, then respond with no context, and just say this ridiculous thing contradicting the information he was just given. Right, he claims inexact quoting. Oh, so actually I saw something about this, because I think I saw something saying there were multiple sources on the quoting, and that they agreed. That, like, it wasn't word for word exact, but it was, like, very close. So, like, you know, the kind of difference between that and how we don't have exactness on, but the difference between does this entire part of the sentence exist in the quote or not, we do know that. But yes, we have quotes, which are considered by scholars to be his actual words, not paraphrases. And he says it's quibbling about the exactness, but it wasn't the exactness, it was that he left out half of the sentence. You know? It's not that he, like... The thing I was quibbling about was not that the word order was changed from of all things the measure is man to man is the measure of all things. Like, that word order is partly like a translation issue. So it was like a minor thing like that, I wouldn't have quibbled over it, but he just left out fucking 3 different sections of a 4-section sentence. So that's a major change. So if you're trying to do serious analysis, it's worth being aware of what the sentence actually was. This leaves out like significant information, all of this information. Right, as he was already told in the first reply he got, that discussion is not useful or interesting or productive without additional information, because this is such a short, vague thing, it is ambiguous. the only thing you can really say about this is it's highly ambiguous about what it means. And he was just not willing to listen to that point. But yeah, this partial sentence is not in fact self-explanatory. So if you want to analyze it, you have to consider things like how Plato presented it, which gives you some context about what it means, and then you get some actual info to go on. But he didn't want to do that. He didn't want to look at the full sentence, or the context in which it was quoted, or what people at the time thought it meant, or anything like that, which would give you enough information to actually figure out what he's talking about. But just by itself, this is so little info, man. Like, what does that mean? You legit cannot tell what it means without extra info. But he did not want to discuss that. He did not want to argue that it does have adequate information. When he was told that it was ambiguous, he just yelled at the person, essentially. Alright, yeah, I have several Ella posts unread, but she's actually... I responded to her most recently, and I was waiting for her to respond. Look for posts with Ella in them. You see, it's this. See, I was trying to explain, like, why it's hard to talk to her, because we don't have, like, agreed upon premises, like, uncontroversial shared knowledge that we can refer to during the discussion. And she said it makes sense so far, except, like, the concepts make sense. She agreed with the methodology. What she disagreed with is she thought that we had CR as a shared toolkit where we can just both refer to any CR stuff, the other person will understand it. And I think that's really wrong. We have never talked about CR. I've talked with lots of CR people, and their views vary. It's not like you talk to a CR person and they know standard stuff. Many of them have no idea what they're talking about, and even of the ones who know some stuff, they often know different parts of CR or have different takes on it. There's a lot of stuff where there's like more than one reasonable way of thinking about it, or I wouldn't say that's ridiculous or anything, but I wouldn't be able to predict in advance how someone will think about a particular CR topic. Like, there's ambiguity in CR, especially at like a less detailed level. Like, the more you like read every word Popper said and analyze everything, you can maybe come up with what is the best interpretation of this part of CR. Whereas if you just like read a few books, then there's like more reasonable interpretations of CR than if you had more details to interpret based on. It gets less ambiguous if you like really, really study it in depth. And right, I pointed out, like, if we agreed on CR and we both like knew the same things about it and thought about it the same way, so I could just say whatever I wanted about CR and she'd understand me, then she already would have addressed a bunch of CR issues. Because from my perspective, she failed to, in her comments on AGI, talk about a bunch of important CR stuff. She said she was basing it on CR, and then I saw like very little CR involved, and she didn't seem to be addressing a lot of the key issues. So to me, that means she does not view CR the same way I do. It's like differently organized in her mind. Not necessarily wrong, but at least different enough that I can't just talk about it my way and expect her to understand me. Anyways, it's really awkward to follow up with people like this. Like, they feel pressured often or get offended. They're like pushy. If you like wait a lot, sometimes they lose interest because it's been too long. So it's like really awkward to decide how quickly to follow up. It's like if you're dating someone and you're like, how long should I wait before I text them back? That's kind of similar, where people you don't have open communication, and it makes it hard. But this person has expressed like hostility multiple times, so we definitely do not have like open communication. I can't just assume everything's fine or say whatever I want. Like, you have to be careful with someone like that, or they're gonna get more mad. But they said something that was a blatant lie, and then I said it was a lie, and then they got offended, and they weren't like open and direct and honest about it, but they mentioned it later, in passing, as something they were bitter about. The lie was they said like X was just Y, and it was like not even close to just as an exclusively or only Y. Actually, speaking of that, I have this. I started responding to Justin's analysis of that conversation, and I in fact wrote here's the lie part right here. And it's right this highlight shot. Anyway, I thought it would be worth I just thought it would be worth mentioning in case you had somehow misunderstood his position. That is not the only singular reason, so that's just not true. And she easily could have known it was not true if she stopped to think about it, so that's lying. By the way, if that doesn't make sense to you, it's explained in this article. It explains what lying is. But anyway, she doesn't treat lying as something that can be analyzed, discussed, written an article about. At least not a philosophy article, maybe like a psychology article. But she doesn't see it as like a truth-seeking topic, which is really common. But she didn't, ask about it or say, hey, you just said something I think you shouldn't have said. It seems like you're doing something bad. apparently we disagree on how to treat people, etc. She didn't raise the issue. Like, she raised some of the issues. She said, what am I lying about? But I gave her, like, a direct, literal answer, and she didn't. I think she still doesn't know what the lie is. But it was just, an initial answer. Anyways, and I gave some explanation. And then she started, like, not replying to everything I said, and seemed kind of lost, but made it, like, really hard to talk to her. Like, she wasn't like, I'm just lost, help, Like, because right here, like, she is guiding the conversation with a direct, short question. This doesn't give me a lot of freedom to help her in the ways I think are best. Like, it's what she's asking for is to me to give her the exact answer she asked for, rather than on my own initiative to decide how to explain it to her. So she didn't ask any open-ended questions or, like, free-form questions. Like, well, I mean, this one is somewhat, but it's a poor question. Like, nothing made me say it. I could have not said it. I wasn't required to say it. I wasn't obligated. I wasn't forced into it, She's not thinking through her question. And the question is not thought through. You look at her messages and you see... Anyways, a person who's like this, and, like, they're following a bunch of conventional social rules and shit, and they're not... It's very hard to talk to them about what they're doing or what's going on. Like, it's like there's an elephant in the room. When you talk with normal people and you have, like, a conversation, like small talk or whatever, it's like there's an elephant in the room the whole time, to use that, like, metaphor and analogy or whatever. And no one's talking about it. So it's like there are all these social dynamics which are happening, and you're not allowed to talk about them openly, or ask questions about them, or clarify them, or whatever. And that's really common, and people are used to it, and I don't like it. And anyways, I have that kind of situation with her. It's very hard to talk about the social dynamics of what she's doing with me. And that also makes it hard to talk about, like, the fact that she just stopped replying at what seemed a very non-random point in the discussion, and she hasn't responded for 3 days. Now, maybe she's busy for 3 days, but it's like, it's hard to ask, it's hard to talk about it. And the longer I wait, the more she might just lose interest in the entire discussion. Because people are very short-term with their interest in discussions, and, like, while it's loaded in their head and they have emotions about it, they're, like, interested. And then if it just sits and goes cold for, like, 3 days, frequently they forget a lot of it, and they no longer feel any emotions about it to, like, excite them or interest them. They lose their motivation, and they don't create new motivation. So it's, like, already, like, a dangerous amount of time. I often just wait, like, over a week before I ask people about following up, and then it's just, like, they've lost all their emotional interest in it by then, and so they often never want to talk about it again. I don't know, so that's awkward. I don't know if anyone has, like, suggestions or solutions or whatever. Right, I wasn't being so hostile. Is there a quote of me being hostile? Like, what is she talking about? Right, and she was just complaining that I was overly literal, but she keeps making errors. Like, she said, since talking to me is apparently quite different from talking to any other person. And that's not true. Talking to me is kind of similar to talking to Justin, for example, or talking to David Deutsch, for example. So she wrote it in a way that makes it false, and she was exaggerating in an adversarial or hostile manner. Like, it was not a random exaggeration or a random error. So she's hostile, I'm not, though. I think it was immediately. Called out is not really what happened. Like, I don't know, I'd say criticized. Or I brought up the issue. I asked questions about it. I wasn't trying to call her out. Calling out is like a social activity. I wasn't trying for, like, public embarrassment or ridicule or something. Calling out is what you got from, like, WWE wrestlers or something, where they're like, I'm calling you out, Hulk Hogan. You better fight me next weekend unless you're too much of a pussy. This comes up all the time, where people are like, you were hostile. And I'm like, what was hostile? And then they'll quote something, sometimes. Sometimes they won't even quote, but sometimes they do quote. And then you have to say, okay, what is your objection to that quote? Because they don't give any explanation. They think it speaks for itself. And then they give more examples instead of answering what was their objection to this message. And I have to say, okay, what's your objection to those? And then I also point out, you interpreted those things as hostile and didn't say so and didn't try to do any problem solving. Got progressively more hostile as a result. Like, so she was sabotaging the discussion. She got upset earlier, did not say so, did not try to deal with the problem. Then she tried to act like nothing was wrong, which is lying by implication. And it implied that she was okay with what I said. If she had told me that she gets offended easily, that she's conventional in that way, then maybe I would have been careful not to say things that she would find offensive. Like, if she told me I'm from a certain subculture, we don't talk that way, like, I can't deal with it, then I could try to remember to avoid saying those things to her. But instead, she acted like everything was fine, so I kept doing more of the same things she had not objected to. And then she got progressively more and more upset by it. Okay, so when I finally got her to try to say what is her objection to one of the messages. And she says it is blatant mockery. Much more rude and hostile than anything I'd said before. Okay, so she's claiming that this quote is blatant mockery, very rude and hostile. And then I asked her the question, can you come up with any interpretation there where that quote has a productive purpose or makes literal sense? And then she says, which quote? Which she does not have the discussion skills to have this conversation if she can't figure out what quote I'm talking about. Like, she just gave a quote and criticized it. And then I asked a question about that quote that she had just given, the most recent one. She says, which quote? This is like a really bad sign. If I did not mean the most recent quote, I would have specified. Like, it would be ambiguous or, like, way too unclear if I wasn't talking about this quote. There's no other quote I could talk about where my sentence would be okay. Therefore, I meant this one. But she doesn't know that. Anyways, I just told her which quote. And she said, I'm not even sure I understand the question. The purpose is to mock what like, she's so blind. And, like, could this quote have a productive purpose? Could it be anything other than mocking? And she's like, I don't understand. The purpose was mocking. And then I say, can you come up with any other interpretation or purpose? And then she comes up with one. And it's like, okay, well, that is a purpose, which is not, the goal there is not mocking, rudeness, or hostility. That is something completely different and actually productive and legitimate. And I didn't have to explain that to her. She's perfectly capable of understanding there was a fair interpretation of what I said where it was, like, productive and trying to make the conversation better. You know, I didn't say it in the most polite way. Like, you could call it a bit rude. That's debatable. But calling it hostile, I think, is unfair. My goal when I made that statement was to communicate something productive. So did I communicate in a rude way? Arguably. Did I communicate in a hostile way? No, I was trying to help. I was trying to make things better. Not trying to hurt her. I was not being adversarial. I was trying to be critical and point things out and explain things. And so it was not hostile. And the goal was not mockery. The goal was to communicate a useful point. I did not know that she wanted me to be, like, really polite. And there's a reason that I phrased it in a colloquial way. Like, I thought that was relevant information. Like, I think she did not realize how absurd she was being. And so I was revealing, this is what you sound like, this is what it looks like. And now you can see that as mockery because she was being ridiculous, and then I correctly characterized what she was being like, so it looks like mockery. But I was going for accuracy. And I was going for, instead of, like, pretending we're in an ivory tower and we have no emotions and no social dynamics, I was going for, let's make this like a realistic statement of what people actually think and talk like that I think is going on. Like, I was going for real world accuracy. I was trying to make it more concrete and more related to her actual situation. So that's why I put it in, like, a colloquial phrasing. I was trying to dispel the thing she was doing where she was pretending to be a dispassionate academic, because I didn't think she was being a dispassionate academic. So I didn't want to write it in that kind of style. Like, a lot of what I write is my own messages, and so they are in that kind of style, and it helps her with the charade, the fraud, the pretense that we're having this back and forth, dispassionate academic scholarly discussion, which is not really what was happening. Like, she's apparently getting offended and shit. But anyways, to some extent, like, I play into that pretext because I'm that kind of person, so I write that way. Like, I'm not consistently that kind of person, but I can be, and I do it sometimes. Anyways, but I didn't think she was being that kind of person. So I wanted, when I was characterizing what she was doing, which I thought was, like, ridiculous, and she was being ridiculous, but she wasn't getting what the problem was, so I was trying to explain it. I was trying to make it clearer to her what was wrong, what was the problem. So I tried to do it in a colloquial way that matched the actual thing, like, rather than in a misleading way, where it was, like, super literal and ivory towery. Right. Okay. Right, so she came up with an interpretation where I was trying to make things better, not being hostile. So I said, why assume hostility when you can think of a non-hostile reason I would say it? Because that interpretation doesn't mean you weren't being hostile. You could have accomplished the same thing in a non-hostile way by saying, from my perspective, your previous message sounds like I didn't realize I was supposed to make true statements. Okay, first of all, if you say it like this could easily be read as hostile, mocking, and rude. This could easily be read as making fun of someone. It seems to be highlighting, and it's like it's a little bit of an understated approach, but you can absolutely ridicule people with understatement. Like, I didn't realize I was supposed to make true statements sounds like a fucking retarded thing to say. I don't see that as any less retarded than the thing I characterized her as saying. I think she was actually being retarded. Like, I'm not trying to attack or insult her, but her position on the matter was dumb, and I didn't think she saw it through, and she wasn't getting it, and I tried to make it clearer to her. And I think I succeeded to some extent. Like, the fact that she interpreted it as mocking meant she realized that, one, it had something to do with her, and two, it was dumb. So she was seeing how dumb she was being, so she felt bad. So she thought I was attacking her because I revealed to her her flaws, and then she felt bad. So that seemed like an attack. Like, that's what happened. And this same thing would have happened with this message. It would have revealed her flaw to her, and she would have felt bad. And it's not like this is polite. This is not at all polite. This is... How can you characterize someone as saying, I didn't realize I was supposed to make true statements? That just sounds passive-aggressive, like you're trying to imply they're a retard. But you don't want to quite come out and say it. Like, mine was more blunt and open and honest, which I thought was, like, less aggro. Like, this one is trying to say it like that's her serious, considered position, which would make her, like, actually stupid. Mine was like... That's not really her position. I want her to see how dumb that is. I know she'll agree with me that that's dumb. Like, I'm trying to say that the thing she's saying is similar to this dumb thing. Whereas this is saying it like she really means that. In a way. Like, it gives a seriousness to her bad ideas that I thought is, like, unfair. Like, this is so fucking mocking. If someone said this to me, like, I could easily think they were mocking me. So she's, like, she's complaining about, like, social implications, but she's really bad at them. Or she's really biased, one of those. Anyways, so then I asked this other question. Had you communicated the... No. I meant this as an alternative. Like, she clearly had communicated information regarding the thickness of her skin. So this was supposed to be, like, pick one. And she went with no. Or at least not intentionally. Well, the question was not, did you intentionally communicate information? Anyways, she had heavily communicated thick skin. So... I said something with a productive purpose to a person who communicated they had a thick skin. I did not expect them to get super upset. But the problem was she was lying to me and had a thin skin. Right, so now she's saying I should have been extra careful. But she had previously communicated to me repeatedly that I didn't need to be extra careful. Which I had already explained to her a minute ago. Oh yeah, this is a fucking lie. Justin finally comments. There's so much stuff Justin didn't comment on. I've just been talking for a while. Anyways, this one was fucking ridiculous, so I'm glad Justin decided to comment here. But, like, if she's still here, that doesn't mean I was careful enough. She's, like, offended. Like, she would have preferred if I was more careful. The bar for her just, like, quitting the Discord server and the bar for having been careful enough are totally different things. Like, you can get a bad result shy of quits the Discord server, but it's still a bad result. This is not thoughtful. She's so tilted. Like, she's not this bad at logic at all times. She's tilted. It's an emotional problem. And she won't admit it, which makes it harder to deal with. Also, with retarded, or idiot or whatever, like, the thing I think is worth saying sometimes is that certain statements or opinions or whatever are idiotic or retarded. Like, rather than the person himself, like, inherently, it's not the person is retarded. It's like, that action they took was pretty retarded. They thought it through, they could have known better. Like, people do dumb shit sometimes, and they know it's dumb in retrospect, and so it's, like, fair to call it that. Some of the things Hopnagar said were dumb by current cultural standards, and by her own standards, she's better than that at other times. And also that was more of, like, a tangent earnest side. But I think it matters when people are, like, egregiously dumb or bad or something, as opposed to just, like, I made a mistake. Like, there's a difference between I made a mistake and I said something that was, like, ridiculously stupid. Like, the ridiculously stupid one has, like, a cause. And the cause matters. If they just make a mistake, like a regular mistake, it's like, okay, mistakes happen, no big deal. But if they say something that's, like, ridiculously stupid and way dumber than they usually are, it's like, okay, are you being emotional? Like, are you super rushed? Something's going on there. So it's actually relevant information to how to reply to it. If someone's being, like, extra super dumb, you don't just reply normally as if it was any old mistake, because there's something bigger going on. And yeah, my goal was not to mock her, it was to show her what she was being like. It felt like mocking because she was being dumb in that particular way. But my goal was not mocking, it was just, like, clarity about what she was being like. I thought if I gave her a perspective on what she was being like, so she could see for herself, from, like, sort of an outside perspective how she sounded, then she would understand better why she was mistaken. Things like that could be cleared up if she wanted to, if she said what the problem was or objected to them or whatever. Like, I can explain them more if someone objects to them. The thing she did was like objecting to a bunch of stuff in her head but not telling me. So then I said more of it, and then she got like more upset. Whereas like I appreciate comments like this. Retarded is too mean to call someone. Like that is an opinion people have. I'm aware people have that opinion. I don't agree with it. But you're welcome to have that opinion. If I remember, I won't call you retarded. I might forget, I admit it, but like this just tells me you disagree with me, and that's fine. We can disagree and we can talk about it, or we can just keep disagreeing. We don't have to like discuss everything, that's fine. But if you don't tell me you have a problem with what I'm saying, I'm just gonna keep saying it. And we're never gonna do anything about the problem, like solve the problem or quarantine the problem and avoid it or whatever. Just like being aware of a problem, of a point of disagreement, you can often just like act in a way where it doesn't matter to what you're doing, like sort of go around the problem, or you can solve it. But if you hide problems, then people will just like walk right into them unnecessarily and cause more of the same problem. Yeah, I like to use words like retarded for that kind of thing because I think a really strong word is merited. If you just say it's bad, like there's a lot of things that are bad. Pineapple on pizza is bad. This qualifies for like a, harsher, stronger words. Like I want to differentiate it from bad things. Those are like very, very, very bad, except very, very, very bad sounds dumb, and we have other words for that, like retarded. There are certainly less offensive ways to do it, like there are other choices. Some people are like really offended by the word retard. I just don't really care. I don't like word policing and like speech restrictions. I think I'm a little rebellious when people try to tell me what to do. So, like, it's not a big deal. I don't go out of my way to cause a problem, but that's like part of why I haven't bothered to change my speech. I don't really want to pander to people who get very offended by taboo words. Like I don't value or respect the taboos. I think that the concept of like mental retardation and mental illness in general, all that stuff is like really confused and people are wrong about it. But I think the word retard is more of a synonym for idiot than actually related to psychiatry issues. In the same way that dumb is more of a synonym for idiot than actually meaning anything about muteness. Like I think the origin of the word retarded is not very relevant. I don't think when I call it retarded, anyone actually thinks I mean like it has an IQ under 75 or some sort of technical definition, which is certainly not what I mean or have in mind. It's just like a particularly strong, like kind of offensive way to say something. The point being like the strength of it. Like it has good emphasis because it offends people. Another thing is if people are offended, like really offended, like, unsolvable problem from words like that, we're not gonna get anywhere with concepts. Like if I think they're a bad parent, that's way more offensive. Someone who like can't even deal with different linguistic conventions is not going to be able to deal with something more substantially offensive, like disapproving of their parenting. I also like the casualness of a bit of profanity and some like informal words. I don't want to sound like a stuck-up professor who lives in an ivory tower and can't talk like a normal person. I'm not that kind of person. I don't want to be that kind of person. I think that's bad. I think they're like pretentious and they're trying to sound impressive by word choices. I think they try to use their impressive facade to make up for the lack of substance. Whereas I will say important ideas with casual language, whereas they'll say empty ideas with really fancy language and try to hide the emptiness.